Hi, this is Steve Gillmor, and this is the Gillmor Gang. Sorry about the delay for those of you who are watching us live. Interesting. We've had a power failure here, which has caused us some delay. And John, I can read those things, but better would be for you to come in on some other channel, because every time you do that, it pops up on top of our video.
Okay.
All right. So, today we've got from Half Moon Bay, Robert Scoble. Welcome, Robert.
Hey, how you doing?
Well, I'm doing better now.
Yeah.
On the phone from New York, Dan Farber.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for sticking with us. And also from New York, John Borthwick.
Hi, Steve. Hi, Dan. Hi, Robert.
And if
Hello.
Andrew Keene can hear the sound of my voice or the sound of my tweet, showtime. So without Andrew, we'll just John, you're going to have to hold down the British accent alone today. Kevin Marks isn't available either, so.
I think I can handle it.
Okay, excellent. So I guess the big news of the week has been the Twitter conference Chirp, which unfortunately I was not able to attend, but which was covered quite well on TechCrunch, so I've read about it. Were you out here for that conference, John?
I was not.
Obviously, there's been a lot of talk about concerns about the cannibalization of the developer community, and since Bitly is a major product in the space, as is what are some of your other products that are part of the Twitter ecosystem?
I think it the pieces at BetaWorks which are directly related to the ecosystem, I would say, or most directly, are Bitly, TweetDeck, Twitter feed, and then there's one or two other things that we have at BetaWorks which are characterized as sort of indirectly. They sort of use Twitter for notifications. Mm-hmm. So the gaming company, I guess StockTwits also I place in the first category, although StockTwits started on Twitter, and it's sort of today it's sort of migrated off Twitter. But the most evident ones are clearly Bitly and TweetDeck and Twitter feed. So
I noticed that Eric Schoenfeld had a conversation with you that he reported on, but could you give us the high-level points of that conversation so that we can sort of frame the discussion?
Sure. So one of the things that got announced this week, along with a lot of other things, was that the Twitter team announced formally that they were going to be doing URL shortening on Twitter.com. And one of the discussions I had I think the discussion I had this week with Eric was that Twitter.com stopped using Bitly for its default status for pretty much for about 90% of the shortening on December 3rd or 4th of last year. And so the announcement that was made this past week was not meaningful to Bitly as a change, because the change had actually happened months before. So that was part of the discussion. I think that was probably the most interesting point.
Are you in touch with Twitter about, were you forewarned about the announcements and the basic shift in their strategy before the conference?
Sure. I mean, we've been working with the Twitter team, for a little over a year on the URL shortening front. So we talked to them. We talked to them quite a bit. So that's not to say that the last 10 days there were a lot of announcements, and there were some announcements which came out at the conference, for some announcements prior to the conference. Some of them surprised me, but
which were the ones that surprised you?
This one didn't. The client announcements actually surprised me a little bit.
Okay, so explain. You're talking about the mobile clients?
The mobile clients. So, I mean, it was the rules of the road of if you want to call them that, the sort of unwritten rules of what had happened in the Twitter ecosystem for the last couple of years was that Twitter had, in essence, two clients. They had a mobile web client, and they had the browser-based client. But that they weren't in the client business per se. So the acquisition of Tweety and the launch of the official BlackBerry app was a surprise to me.
And what part of it was surprising, and what part of it was surprising in terms of your own interests?
Well, I mean, I think that when I say it was surprising, I mean, when you step back and you think about the space and how when you step back away from it, it wasn't entirely surprising. I mean, it's not like it was it had no context, but I think that what was surprising was that it clearly marks a change in strategy, and it marks, in my mind, the people who are in the business of building simple, lightweight interfaces on varied devices to access, to read and write Twitter, have now either got to run very fast and provide differentiated products on those platforms, or they've got to pack up shop and do something else.
But isn't this a classic, conundrum that developers have with a emerging or a powerful platform? I mean, we're seeing this being played out as well with Apple, with the iPad and iPhone 4.0 software, and some of the restrictions that Jobs has put in place regarding how developers can address the platform. I mean, it's not
Sure.
like nobody here is being woken up in the middle of the night at 3 a.m. like Hillary Clinton and saying that this is unexpected. Isn't this always a dynamic and a tension in the relationship?
It is, and I think it's what's I think a little bit different here is I'll just go through a couple of points. The first is that the Twitter platform had evolved in one fashion for a handful of years, and so a lot of people assume that would just continue, for until a point in time. And I think that the communications with the ecosystem, prior to Chirp was lacking. I think at Chirp, if Chirp had not taken place, if those events had happened without Chirp, I think that there would be a lot more anxiety in the ecosystem. I think that Chirp was hugely helpful in communicating and filling in a lot of the gaps. I think, as Laura Fitton had said last week or the week before, is that some of the people at Twitter, I think, mistook silence for diplomacy, and so I think that as being a platform vendor, it's very important to communicate and to give a reasonable visibility into your roadmap. But the fundamental tension that we're talking about between platforms and applications, that's been around since the beginning of computing time, and that ain't going to change. So I think that when you look at it from that perspective, no surprise.
Okay, who can't hear me very well? Who can't? Robert, can you hear me now?
You're really soft. Okay. I don't know why. Once in a while on our show, you get really soft, and then you get louder.
Okay, well, I'll pump it up a little bit. How's that?
That's better.
Okay, great. Sorry. Go ahead, Robert. You had a comment?
No, I just was hearing the same thing from the developers at Chirp. I interviewed quite a few of them, and they said toward the end of the conference they were much more positive on Twitter than they were at the beginning. I think at the beginning they were still processing the client strategy change that John was talking about, and at the end they started realizing that they still had a business and could still make a run of it, and they really appreciated the Twitter team's openness. The entire team came out to Chirp and hung out with the developers in the hallway and were quite transparent. So I think they won themselves a lot of friends this last week.
Dan Farber, you haven't really been focused too much on this this debate from your position in New York, but does it recall any of the kinds of things that you're used to that you were a part of in the past with Windows and OS2?
Well, I don't know about Windows OS 2, but I think it's following a familiar track of any company that starts out with big ambitions to change the world and do something profound. And then all of a sudden you get, I don't know what they have, something like $160 million in venture capital and mutual fund dollars invested in the company. And that tends to change the nature of the company over time. And I think we're just starting to see the evidence of that, which is having a real business model and then buying up what they would call applications, or I think as John was talking about, what's a hole that they're trying to fill that isn't already filled. And I think that's where it becomes a little bit tricky for them to navigate in the future, which is, how much of the developer community are they going to piss off by just bagging all the good stuff, which is a lot of what Google has been doing.
How has Google been doing that?
Well, haven't they acquired a whole bunch of startup companies? I mean, they're looking at Yelp probably right now.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a little bit different in that, Twitter has enabled all these developers to build on their platform.
But
in this case,
Dan,
go ahead.
The change that happened this week is one of strategy, where they announced they're going to start doing their own stuff, but they're not going to be able to do like what Seismic or TweetDeck can do, which is build a client that runs across Facebook and Twitter. Twitter's never going to build Facebook into their client, so there still is a lot of business opportunities available. And for everybody else,
why would not Twitter build Facebook into their client if indeed it was a revenue generator?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they have to play by different rules.
Now that
they're in the game.
At some point, the investors come back. The investors come back and say, "Give me."
Yeah, I think that would be a tough position to sell inside Twitter. I think the only way you would sell that is if your back is to the wall and their back isn't to the wall yet. But the other thing that they announced, and the reason the developers are still somewhat happy, is now Twitter has a monetization strategy. And with this new promoted tweets, where they're sharing the revenue 50-50 with the client developers. So if you're a client developer like Seismic or TweetDeck or whatever, or I had dinner with Nick from TweetMeme, he now is going to have a new way to make revenue, even if he is on the Twitter platform, and he still is going to have all those users. I mean, everybody's not going to switch from TweetDeck to Tweety overnight. So that gives them some revenue and gives them some runway to do something else.
John Borthwick, what do you think about, does Twitter have to start playing by some different rules and become more cooperative, if you follow the word, with Facebook and other players?
Well, let me. There's a lot of points here. Let me try and unpack a few of them. The first is that when you think and talk discreetly about the Twitter platform, I think there was a huge step forward which took place last week, which is they've started to monetize, and monetization is vital because it's sort of, as I've often said, vis-a-vis the ecosystem. Tell us whether you're vegetarian or whether you're a carnivore, and the ecosystem will then be able to either go out and hunt or plant vegetables, or so once the monetization model is in place, you actually get the ecosystem can say, okay, we can now fill in other places and monetize in other fashions, and then we can also complement the existing monetization platform. So from strictly a Twitter perspective, I think big step forward. I also think that from a communication perspective is that the team at Twitter now understand that they have there's this compact, this compact, which exists between them and the development community. And in order for them to build a healthy, sustainable development community, they're going to have to be able to, communicate, they're going to have to be able to communicate the release of annotations, they're going to have to communicate how far people can go with that, they're going to have to communicate how far people can go vis-a-vis their monetization system. So that's all strictly Twitter. Then the second piece of the question, which you touched on, which I think is very interesting, is that today there's something different which is going on, which is we have a set of overlapping and related platforms that are emerging in the cloud on the web. And users want to be able to push their data back and forth between those platforms. I think that the trajectory is towards openness amongst all these platforms, but each of these platforms exists today in varying degrees of openness, and there's going to be a lot of tension and sort of cross-migration between them, and I think that users will come out, end users and developers will come out as winners there because they're going to have multiple things to play off.
Yeah, I think that's why this is an interesting conversation to have at this point in time, because we're just about halfway between the Twitter conference and the Facebook F8 conference that's coming up this week. Have you heard anything from the Facebook camp as to what they're going to announce there?
I have not.
Yeah. Nobody's talking. If they haven't heard, they're not talking very openly about it. So that'll be an interesting thing to see what transpires this week.
What do you think, John, is the roadmap for Bitly moving forward? Is this? I think you explained to Schoenfeld about where most of your impressions, or however you count them, are coming from. That they're coming from across the ecosystem of Twitter clients, so that the impact of Twitter going to its own URL shortener is fairly minimal. But does the emergence of a business model for Twitter suggest that they're going to become a lot more like Facebook and vice versa? And are you going to move? Are you going to address the Facebook community?
So a couple of different answers there. First, just to correct a data point. So the way that we think about the numbers at Bitly is we think about sort of two critical numbers: the number of links that people shortened yesterday, last week, last month, and then the number of clicks that those links received. So it shortens and clicks. Steve, you said at the outset that the number of shortens that we're receiving is the majority is within the Twitter ecosystem, not Twitter.com. That's correct. But it is not a majority of Bitly. It's just a majority relative to Twitter.com. So Twitter, all of the Twitter world, represents about 45% of all the activity within Bitly on any given day. Sometimes a little bit higher, sometimes a little bit lower. But so call it just a little bit less than half. And Twitter.com is now a small fraction, less than 1% of that. So it's the clear majority is within the Twitter clients and other services within Twitter who are using Bitly in one way, shape, or form. Last month we got hundreds of millions of clicks, both from Facebook and also Bitly links going into Facebook, hundreds of millions, on a base of about 3.5 billion, 3.4 billion was the total. So I published all this data last week because I thought it was helpful to sort of frame and contextualize that, as these, part of the strategy with Bitly is that as there are these multiple overlapping platforms that exist on the web, and people are going to want to share content between them, shortening URLs and sending short URLs between these platforms is going to be a service people need. And the data bears out that that's indeed what's happening. So I think one of the lessons out of the Bitly experience is just the importance of by working with these platforms, either being close to them and having a contract, as in the case of Bitly, or as in the case of TweetDeck, just building a great product which is just adopted by a large number of people within the platforms. These platforms do offer a way for developers to bootstrap their product to a point of critical mass. Once it reaches that point of critical mass, or at some point, I think the onus is really on the developers and the product creators to then also sort of spread their wings a bit and see if they can get their feet in multiple platforms. And so TweetDeck has done that, so has Bitly. Yes?
John, don't the new annotations feature do away with the need for shortened URLs, at least in part?
Why don't you just let Nick Halstead, whisper in your ear, and then you can just repeat it? He said that in the comments just now.
I know. I'm reading the
I
comments.
know.
Okay, I know. So, so I think that the annotations features may, and I mean, the architecture around Twitter. I mean, so much of the benefit of what was created at Twitter was because of the simplicity of the architecture, and it's clearly now there's a layer of complexity which has been tiled on top of that. Twitter still has to work and interact with tens of millions, potentially hundreds of millions of cell phones and SMS out there, and so I would expect, Robert, and this is just a guess because I have no idea. I don't. There's been some discussion over the last couple of days on the breadth of what the annotations features could do, but I would expect that there would be a display. There'll be an option just to be able to embed the URL and have a display.
Yeah, that's what I'm expecting too. Well, we're not going to see this feature in public for 3 months at least, until next quarter, they say. And they're still even arguing over how long the annotation will be. I've heard 512 bytes, which is, about 300 characters, something like that.
Right.
And we know that it's not going to be rewritable, so you're not going to be able to write to it after the tweet is published, which limits its usefulness in a lot of ways. But it'll be interesting to see what developers do with it. And then we all know that Twitter's been working on this redesign, which they didn't show off at all last week. I was really shocked by that because, Doug Bowman, one of the head designers there, teased the new design on his blog by showing a corner of it. And the fact that they didn't even show anything or talk about it at all was very surprising to me.
Dan Farber, do you use Twitter in CBS News Online? Does it represent?
Yeah, we are very liberal Twitter users. In fact, I think our CBS News account has about 1.6 million followers, and some of our talent or anchors have used Twitter, like Katie Couric. And in fact, on Tuesday at 3:15 East Coast time, we have a live interview between Katie Couric and Diz Stone. So I don't think it'll get too in the weeds, but it could be fun.
Well,
and it's an integral part of our strategy because we're taking kind of the idea that we need to bring CBS News or any online publication needs to think about how people are going to be consuming information in the future, and Twitter's a part of that, as well as Facebook and other social networks and mobile devices. So we really have to gear up for that, as well as, I think, for the iPad.
All right. So how's the iPad implementation going?
Well, we're still designing it, and should be done with that in the next couple of weeks. But we want to create kind of a more unique experience, which is to get away from the idea of just flashy front page and then web pages, but to make stories more interactive with overlays and things like that.
John,
really try to break through.
John, what about a smart URL shortener that detects or is aware of whether there's an alternative to a flash container at the other end of the pipe, and in that case switches over to a H.264 version of video, so that we could have a true iPad network starting to be built out?
That would be neat.
You think? So, I mean, do you have the resources to be able to invest in that kind of a strategy? I mean, what I'm trying to unpack here, within the limits of your willingness to discuss proprietary information, I'm trying to unpack what it is that is your process in terms of figuring out what you want to do with this expanding network. I mean, it seems pretty clear that when Katie Couric is engaged, that this is no longer an early geek adopter kind of environment here. This is expanding rapidly into the mainstream media, if not becoming the mainstream media, which is what I think.
Yeah, I agree with that. So, but I'm not. Yeah, I don't think it's appropriate to go too far into sort of the future plans of Bitly here.
What about in general? Are you looking at startups that are coming to you and emerging ideas about how to address this space?
Sure. You mean new Twitter-related startups? Is that
Yeah,
the question?
or in the case of, I mean, I think the iPad as a platform, right now it's very difficult on the iPad, as I think Robert and I have talked about in the past, to be able to. There's no widget capability essentially in
Right.
this version of the product, so we've kind of gone from these kind of highly interactive screens where we have multiple streams bubbling up and alerting to kind of like this green field where it appears that nothing's happening unless you actually go to a specific stream.
Yeah, I mean, I think that so a couple of things. I'm hugely excited about the opportunities on the iPad. I mean, independent of Twitter, but related to real time and related to social media. I mean, I think that I think that I'm in the camp of the iPad being, still being underhyped and being just a fundamental game changer in the way that people interact with this device, and so I'm loving it. And but I would agree that I think that today is the sandbox and the ability that you have to be able to do things is still somewhat limited. Though I'm starting to see some fascinating things pop up. So,
Like what? Give me some ideas.
well, I love there's a very simple app which is called Camera A and Camera B, which lets you use your camera on your iPhone on the iPad, and it's one of those very simple little things that is just dislocating. You set it up, and all of a sudden you've got a remote camera which is on your iPad. And so, there's a lot of people who've complained about the lack of a camera on the iPad, and in fact, all those people have iPhones, so you just load up Camera A and Camera B, and you're off and running. So that one was one. It's one of those very simple things that just extends your concept of the device, because all of a sudden you don't think about the device as being a single device. You think of it as being part of a connected set of devices, including obviously the Apple devices in earshot or Bluetooth shot of that device. So that one, that one sort of bended my brain a little bit.
Robert, your thoughts about the multitasking capability? Isn't that going to bring a lot of this capability of integrating social media with the iPad into focus rather quickly?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to some of the new features in OS 4, multitasking being one of them. I mean, at night I'm reading Tweety or Twitterific, or SkyGrid, and I want to run Pandora underneath and listen to music, or I want to, sort of watch video off to the side, like I was this morning with the TEDx volcano conference that was happening in London, and I can't do that on the iPad. It's very frustrating.
John, just real quickly, you have TweetDeck as a BetaWorks company, correct?
Correct. Correct.
How's the iPad version coming?
And Steve, let me just clarify one point, because I saw that Robert was tweeting us about us as a VC. So we're not a VC, we're not a fund at BetaWorks. There's sort of a quick description of what BetaWorks is if you go to bit.ly/beta, what is beta. But what BetaWorks is we're in essence a holding company, and we both invest and build things. So Bitly is something that we built, we technically incubated, and TweetDeck is something that we invested in, almost like a VC, but we're a little bit unusual in terms of structure. So yes, TweetDeck is a BetaWorks company.
And Surmise you also invested in, correct?
Surmise was one which we invested in, and then we almost did like a reverse incubation, because we started working really closely with those guys to reboot their product when they went into version 2. So because we're a company, we can have this sort of very flexible way of working with other companies.
So the question was about TweetDeck. How's the iPad version coming?
So the iPad version, if you've used it, is great. I love it. So we got great adoption. It was one of the is one of the first iPad Twitter clients out there today, and or out there at launch. And it's I think it's a very nicely architected iPad app.
I found, John, that I just haven't taken to it the way I took to it on a big monitor, like this iMac behind me. There's something about it that just doesn't use the iPad form factor the way I'm hoping that Twitter apps do. Twitterific sort of does in that it takes over the entire screen, but it doesn't have the column approach that TweetDeck does. So I think it'll be interesting over the next couple of months to see what version 2 looks like, because I bet now that the developers have their hands on these devices, I bet they're going to change some of their assumptions and change how these apps really work. Yeah.
I mean, it was, the development process with for the launch was difficult, to say the least. And so, Apple is, keeps very tight boundaries on what people can see and use. And there was, so the product went out. I mean, I think that it is most usable from a navigation standpoint in horizontal mode. But there was a feature which was taken out by Apple. Actually, there was something in 48 hours before launch, which actually disabled links in horizontal mode.
Yeah,
so hugely frustrating for us, but the team are revving it now, and would love to hear more, Robert, specifically on that, because the team worked really hard to make the iPad experience on TweetDeck sort of native to the device. So if they're not there yet, they would love to hear more about it, I know.
Yeah, I do most of my reading in the vertical mode, just like on my iPhone. I do the same thing. And I don't like reading in the horizontal mode. Twitter to me is a stream, and using the stream to watch it vertically, it makes the most sense to me, which is probably why I took a little bit better to Twitterific, because it takes the entire screen and I can just keep refreshing all night long and just watching the tweets flow down my screen.
Interesting.
Dan Farber, what client do you use?
Well, I use TweetDeck and on both my iPhone and on my desktop. But I also like Twirl.
Is that now? Is that the desktop version or the Adobe Air client?
The Air client.
What are all you guys' take on the impact on Adobe Air versions of products, given the iPad's blockade against Flash? Do you think it's going to impact on Air as well? Anybody grab that one?
I know that I'm using Air apps less and less because of this. I want the same experience on this big iMac as I have on my iPhone, as I have on my Dell laptop sitting here, and that means getting rid of Flash in my life and going with native apps that are designed for these things. John?
Yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, I think that the Adobe Apple debate, I think it was hugely enlightening to see Apple speak about it a little bit, and I think that the design criteria and the threshold that Apple have and their desire to have true native apps is understandable, and I respect that. I mean, I think that the quality of apps that you see on these platforms is, when they're actually natively built for the platform, is significantly better. That said, is that there's clearly cross-platform tension. There's a lot of value, and as we have more and more endpoints on the network that need to work together, it's got to push us towards HTML5 or some other options where we can build in a truly cross-platform way.
Well, yeah, I think what Robert was saying about the multiplicity of different devices. I've got a MacBook Air here as part of my new job. I have a Dell Windows machine, which I'm horrified about, but I'm dealing with it, and I've got the iPad, and I'm spending about 75% of my time on the iPad just because it is such a portable factor. And I recently just wrote a post for TechCrunch that I wrote entirely on the iPad, and I had to download Pages and spend the $10 to do it because I couldn't figure out any other way. I understand now that there's a WordPress iPad app, but I haven't tried it, and I have no idea whether it's full-featured enough. But the idea, I mean, the principal reason that the Pages app works for me is that it saves in the background to the hard drive, so there's a certain feeling of stability. And I imagine that I was disappointed and somewhat surprised at the Atmosphere event at Google on Monday, where they announced some new features for Google Docs. When I tried to use it, basically the PR guy from Google sitting next to me said that it wouldn't work, that it was only for read-only at this point, and that they were waiting on a browser that actually would support it, which I thought was like that might happen about the same time that there's a new browser on the iPhone, even though Opera is on the iPhone. So I wonder whether the synergy between Apple and Google, which has been so helpful for both of them in the early run-up of the iPhone, whether that's going to bifurcate now and we're going to see this disconnect where you can't really do anything in the create mode, as Dave Weiner would put it, on the iPad. I think that's largely something that'll go away once multitasking is enabled, because it'll allow you to basically talk between two apps and move data from an app on the client to another app on the client or to the network in the background. And once that happens,
well, I think it's the multitasking, but I also think, Steve, it's the input, because it may be weird, but I keep wanting to write on the damn thing.
Well, I did write. I mean, I find the virtual keyboard to be actually terrific. I was really surprised.
No, but I've been using the virtual keyboard, but I'm saying write.
Oh, you mean like a slate?
Yes.
Well, why do you want to do that? I mean, I can't even read my handwriting. Why would a machine know how to read?
John, have you tried an app called WritePad that lets you actually write in handwriting?
I have. I tried WritePad. I've been trying a lot of them, and I got myself a stylus, and I started. It's hard. I don't know. There seems to be. I haven't studied the technology, and so I don't understand exactly how the Surface is working. But it seems like that it is not fine-grained enough to be able to actually distinguish or be able to do small movements like you need for writing. But I keep wanting to write on it, which to me says something. Maybe
but that's going back to Dan Farber. Do you remember the Bill Gates tablet?
Yes.
Well, I do. I sold them to him.
Yeah. Well, what was your take on the tablet, Dan?
Well, it just wasn't good enough, and I think Jean-Louis Gasset has an essay. It's a site called MondayNote.com, and we republish it. And he's been through all those different iterations throughout the history of tablet computing. And his impression was that the iPad is a good start, and the first one where you can really see that the tablet will take off. The fact that it doesn't use pen and ink at this point, though, I think is one where the sensible person would think, that's a feature that will come as Apple iterates on it.
Yeah, I'm not so sure. I remember being very excited about the tablet in concept.
Yeah, but when you think about just the kind of capabilities that every student in every university, in every high school, in every school has a device like this, that the ability to draw, write, whatever, in addition to type, is going to be just part of the feature set.
Yeah,
and this is where you get into that.
I mean, I hear you. I mean, I hear what John's saying, that this is something he's trying to do. To me, it just...
I'm just saying there's a real business. I'm saying there's a real business out there for this.
Well, you mean you're talking about enterprise adoption. Well, I would agree with you there.
No, I'm not talking about enterprise adoption. I'm talking about education.
Right. Well, education is an enterprise. What I'm saying is,
Yeah,
is that
but Dan, what this
you're talking about an
disrupts-
extra channel, basically.
Dan, what this disrupts is the textbook industry, and textbooks don't do anything, right? They just sit there and display text to you. This is already a huge improvement over textbooks, and also means that distribution can be a hell of a lot cheaper because you're not cutting down dead trees, or grinding up dead trees to make the product.
No, and I think that would be interesting to talk to Dan Rosenzweig, who just took over Chegg, which is kind of the Amazon of textbooks. But you can see the same kind of transition from Netflix sending things in the mail to digital distribution with textbooks.
Yeah, I wonder, the Netflix reference is an interesting one because it's very exciting when you unpack the iPad and plug in your Netflix account, and all of a sudden you're streaming. In my case, Cliff Garish found a Jimi Hendrix biography film, and it's stunning how wonderful that is. The problem I see, though, is that the Comcasts of the world are not going to let Netflix just destroy their windowing model. You only get maybe 5% of the films that are available on DVD that you can get on streaming. I mean, there's a natural blockade against providing this panacea, being able to just download anything, network television, whatever, the day that it's released. This is not going to be allowed. If it were, Comcast would lose, hundreds of millions of customers overnight. Any comment? Okay, well, how are we doing on time, John?
I've got about another 5-10 minutes, Steve.
All right. Well, what do you want to talk about?
What? I have a question for John. Where does he see the location world going? Because Twitter announced some features for that, but still hasn't done anything really dramatic in location to take on Foursquare, for instance. And we got Foursquare and GoWalla, and we keep hearing that Facebook is going to come into this world, but I guess we got to wait till next week's show to really understand that.
So Robert, let me answer the questions as I would have answered it a week or 10 days ago first. So the way that I used to construct in my mind and what Twitter was that Twitter was a rich stream of data which people could publish to, and people could also use as a notifications platform. And so what I saw was that there were sort of discrete verticals, and I'll just pick two as examples. One is local, and the other one is the questions area. And so in local, you've always got Foursquare, and you've got GoWalla, and you've got Brewer, and you've got Looped a little bit in the local area, in the local bucket. In the second bucket, I mentioned the questions bucket. You've got FormSpring, and I can never sure if I pronounce it right, but Quora, I guess.
Yeah. And Aardvark.
And Aardvark, right. And so, those services in both those buckets, all those services to varying greater degrees, they have their own sort of intrinsic experience which exists on their component of the network, but they use Twitter as a notifications platform. And so they use Twitter to both bootstrap and get audience, to get into the friend graph, and also to notify people of activity, and then they pull people back into the actual their network or their sub-network, which has this vertical experience which is much richer. So coming back to what we now know from Twitter, which is still we don't have a lot more information, but I would say both the location stuff that they're doing, but also the annotation / metadata stuff that they're doing, can change this this architecture or this network that I just outlined, because Foursquare could publish into Twitter a lot more information, and then you will have the tension that people won't actually need to go to Foursquare because they'll get most of it on Twitter.
Right. I mean, can't you, at Bitly, can't you harvest these second and third generation, emissions from these various location companies and be able to do something with that yourself?
Yes. I mean, yes. So the question in my mind is, both in terms of location and in terms of the metadata, is, there's this sort of creative tension that's going to exist between these sort of the core platforms, Twitter, obviously the preeminent example of that is the core open platform, but also Facebook to some degree, and Facebook, definitely because of the scale of Facebook, which is multiples the size of Twitter, but also this question of openness and how can you actually publish into these platforms is different on each case. And so the developers are going to look for lowest common denominator, and they're going to look for how they can actually gain audience and relate to these other networks without cannibalizing their own sort of experience. And so I think that there's going to be a lot of tension and creativity and change that's going to go on in between these sub-networks, call them local questions as two examples, and the core networks, which I viewed as mostly notifications networks, but are now becoming richer.
So
does that make any sense?
Yeah, there's actually a question in the chat from Julian who said these seem like they're just, as Fred Wilson say, filling holes. And they're features, and I heard this from Jeff Clavier too this week, that he just doesn't believe yet that Foursquare or Gowalla have very much defensible value. They don't do that much that really translates into a feature or a system for the end user. And I sort of agree with him there. I find it hard to evangelize these things to normal people. I mean, all the geeks in the South by Southwest crowd get these things right away because we all want to talk with each other. But getting normal people to understand the value here is really difficult.
Yeah, I would agree with that general point, that getting normal people to even understand the value of Twitter is very difficult. But I think that I think there are, this talk of filling holes and these things just being holes in other people's networks. I don't get it because, well, I get it. I understand what people are saying, but I think first of all is that most innovation is about filling holes to some degree. To a great extent, I'm sure there's some of your old friends, Robert, at Microsoft, who think that Google is a hole that should be filled.
Well, I think the biggest hole that's been filled this week is that Twitter has filled the hole of having a business model. I think they're the ones filling the hole, not the developers. I think the developers have been leading the way, and Twitter is catching up.
And I think the other thing is, Steve, is that what we saw this week is we saw a whole rich set of data that is going to be now, over time, hopefully as soon as possible, is going to be now released and pushed out. It is clear, and from our perspective at BetaWorks, we were getting a little bit frustrated by, we weren't seeing that much innovation actually take place on top of the stream. And I think that it was for a handful of reasons. One of them was that there was a reasonably well-defined but limited data set that people could work with. There were bazillion sites that we saw who just took the search API and then tried to narrow it down by topic. Right, so basically just put in a bunch of celebrity names and then came up with a website that was just, real-time celebrities, right? And it would just show the stream cut by hitting the search API with the names of celebrities, right? I mean, stuff like that, which you could do in 5 minutes, yourself with TweetDeck if you want to. There's not a lot of innovation in that, and so I'm hoping now that we're going to see a lot more innovation and a lot more interesting stuff. I think that this, the reason why the holes comment, or the whole reason why I think it's resonated with people, is that what it really is, what's resonating is it's pointing to the tension between platform provider and application provider and the lack of certainty people have in terms of where those boundaries are. And that needs to be clarified over time. I think a lot got clarified last week, but I think there's still a lot more to clarify. And the marketplace and the ecosystem, as this tension takes place between the two, we'll see more clarity, hopefully. And if we don't, the result will be is we won't see investment capital come in, we won't see people build neat things, and we won't see neat businesses emerge. We'll see just a lot of little things.
But we're not
part of that, John, is we're just really bored. I mean, you play with Foursquare for a
you're
while,
bored,
like
Robert.
I have. And,
I'm not bored.
It doesn't do all that much. I mean, it brings you a little bit of serendipity around place. I mean, I landed in Paris, and it showed me where the best French bakery was because somebody left me a tip there. And it brings me serendipity around my social graph. But that gets old pretty fast. And now we're like, well, where's the really cool new app that's going to do something mind-blowing? And right now it seems like all those cool developers are building games for the iPad, not necessarily for the Twitter ecosystem.
To your point, Robert.
Games for Facebook, but they're doing that because they can make some money there. And they're doing that because they know that this is a sustainable platform, right? I mean, we talk about, earlier on we were talking about Apple and the tension in Apple. I mean, I know it's a small point, but I was kind of intrigued just to see that on the iPad, they actually left off a handful of standard Apple apps that are on the iPhone, right? Like Weather and Calculator, because they'd sort of seeded the platform. Now they could step back. So I hope that Twitter does the same, and that there's now a lot more rich data that's in the stream, and that we can see some real innovation emerge. Because
well, just
I agree with
in
you.
terms of the
last 6 months, a lot.
In terms of location, we went to breakfast this morning, and I took my iPad. I wasn't sure why I took it, but once I got into the restaurant we were at, I opened it up and looked to see whether there was Wi-Fi. There was no sign on the door that said anything. I opened it up, and there was free Wi-Fi, and I was right back on the network. So, that's the kind of calculation that you make going forward is, oh yeah, let's go there because I may have a phone call that I have to take and I need to refer to some stuff. The way that we actually process, this is the point of the post that I put up, the way that we are learning to process data and conduct business and play in real time is fundamentally changing as a result of the architecture of the iPad. The iPad is not a finished device, and Google is not going to sit there and let that completely disrupt what they're doing. So there's going to be this healthy, what I think, John, you're saying is there's going to be a healthy tension that's going to drive forward innovation on both platforms, and therefore many. And
I find that very exciting. I mean, I think that one of the reasons why I think there's quite a few people who picked up the iPad and said, hey, this thing is, what does this do for me better? And I think that almost invariably the people in our industry who are critical of the iPad, in my mind, what they were saying is that they had a fixed set of workflows, which the desktop and the notebook laptop devices served them well for. They picked up the iPad and they tried to execute those workflows on the iPad, and they were sorely disappointed because the iPad does something different. And I think we've got to unpack that difference, and we've got to understand what that difference is. And I think that in the same way that streams are sort of redefining the way that we think around pages, and yet we've got this, we've got 20, 30 years of history around the structure that is in place today, and it's just taking us a while and taking people a while to push the boundaries of that. So,
Dan Farber, last thoughts?
I think it's a good discussion, and we are at a kind of a new plateau where there's going to be hopefully a lot more innovation. But I think, again, as we've seen, Facebook and Twitter and Google, that the profit motive really changes behavior in some way in terms of how open and how much room there's going to be for developers.
Robert?
Oh God, I could go in a whole bunch of directions. I hope to do a show soon talking just about the advertising platform and hearing from some of the advertisers like the Starbucks and even the Rackspaces of the world who are going to buy some ads here. Where do we see the money? Is the money going to show up? And then is that going to really drive the new kinds of innovation that John is talking about?
All right. Well, let's call that a wrap for a glorious Sunday here in Northern California. We're because of the demands of my new job, we're probably going to be doing more, but not all of the Gillmor Gangs on the weekend. And I appreciate everybody who showed up. It's not easy to get people like John, and Robert will do it anytime, anywhere, because I know where I have some secrets that I hold over his head. And Dan Farber had a beautiful series of pictures of Central Park trees on friend feed or Twitter, whatever it was yesterday. So you should go take a look at that. I want to thank Rackspace for sponsoring this show, and Rob Legess for making that happen, without whom this show would not be on the air. And I want to thank NewTek and their fabulous TriCaster for supplying the video services that make this, I think, a unique experience. And I want to thank everybody who showed up, and especially those who didn't. We'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.